all for being here. I really appreciate you. So I'm here for 20 minutes, and I want to share some ideas based on my background. I'm a researcher at Stanford, and I also run a consulting business where I do science advising and research, and I really focus with organizations that are building products for human flourishing, specifically through the behavior design lens. And for this group today, I do use some blank slides. When you see one, take a moment to, tune into what you're hearing instead of what you're seeing, what you're feeling in your body. And this group, I know, understands the stakes of this moment, right? We have an immensity of the technological precipice that we are standing on. Just in the last couple weeks in the New York Times, among other places, we have reports of chatbots and AI really going off the rails, right? Reinforcing schizophrenic delusions, isolating vulnerable people, even leading to suicides, right? And we're only a couple years into these incredibly powerful technologies. And at the same time, as a researcher, I use these tools all the time. They're incredible. They've revolutionized my research workflow several times over. And they take hours of tedium and condense it so I can get right to the good and interesting parts. So importantly, even if we get AI right, and even in the most optimistic of forecasts, they will still demand the most rapid and widespread adaptation of our nature that has ever been asked of humanity. And so I'm here to share a little bit about our nature and how important it is to explore who we are and how we flourish in the context of these advancing tools. So as far as where we'll go today, we'll start by talking about some themes of human uniqueness, and then the frame for flourishing that I really like is evolutionary mismatch theory. We'll dive closer at social connection and the human need to matter and how we can bring that into our work together. And finally, how we build for better alignment with our nature and how we bring measure into the process of developing products. So my background that I'm sharing is really all focused on human flourishing, and it's informed by many of these different experiences. A lot of my work these days is in the science of social connection with a group called Stanford Lifestyle Medicine, with Sunny, and also running the premier measure of social connection in the United States, which I'm in the middle of data analysis right now, and we'll have results in a couple of months. We'll talk a lot more about the Boundaries Project and the anthropological, biological side of things. As far as the well-being psychometrics, that was done in my graduate work with a group called Stanford Well for Life, and also with Compassion 2.0 and Flourishingly. And finally, in the behavior design lab with BJ Fogg, that's where we actually build and test and innovate for human flourishing through behavior change. So let's start here together. We are here to help people flourish, right? And in order to do that, we have to understand the roots of how flourishing works deep in our nature. I want to introduce this project. My deepest exploration of our nature came in the context of a Stanford project called The Boundaries of Humanity: Humans, Animals, and Machines in the Age of Biotechnology. And it's a vast interdisciplinary project with dozens of collaborators and scholars from around Stanford and the broader Bay Area. And I worked as a researcher and research scholar for the better part of 10 years on this project. And in the conversations we had, we focused on three big questions. What is unique about humans? What is our nature? What is human flourishing? And how do we carry those conceptions of human flourishing into the future as we develop information and biotechnologies that really give us unprecedented powers and tools to intervene on our psychology, on our bodies? So I want to give you the high-level version of three of the subtler themes of human uniqueness that we coalesced around in this project. The first one is really adaptability, and how plastic, how adaptable the human is. And it exists on many levels. We are adaptable in our development. We have extremely long childhood and adolescent periods. We don't come prefigured in the world, but we rather emerge as extremely plastic and moldable individuals. Evolution built us unfinished, and it's culture that completes us. And at the other end of life, we have uniquely long post-reproductive lives, which is something that you really rarely don't see in the animal kingdom. There's adaptability in our behavioral repertoires, in our idealizing imagination. And that is how we form in our minds an image of the good, the perfect form, and we motivate ourselves towards it. Obviously, adaptability in our technology and our culture, expanding our capacities as individuals and collectives, and in the diversity and capacity of our social structures, which I'll talk more about later. And we are at once the most flexible and adaptable and plastic of species, but we are also embodied and constrained by our biology like any other animal. What we feel and how we think is inseparable. It's not just from our brain, but from our entire embodied form. And this form gives rise to our distinctive flexibility and comprehension and control of the world around us. For example, it's been shown that the human form, with our size and our dexterity, is really the perfect form for being able to harness fire, which is a foundational technology for human civilization. And the final theme is an amalgamation of consciousness, identity, and a desire for transcendence. Each of these are important themes. Each one of us is a psycho-spiritual, physical unity. One mind, one body, one individual. And the consciousness that gives rise to that, our subjectivity, is beyond computation. There is no brain upload for our unique consciousness. And as such, as a psychophysical spiritual unity, we have to contend with our motivations and desires. Leon Kass says, desire, not DNA, is the deepest principle of life in humans and all the way down the phylogenetic history of organisms. It's desire that drives us, but it also has to be grounded and informed by some sense of human dignity, of purpose, and of meaning. And there's the theme both of ancient religions and modern transhumanist and longevity movements is the desire to transcend our nature and even our mortality. So with those, as Yuval Noah Harari puts it, the desire, we're going to be hacking desire itself. And it's more important not to ask what do we want to become, but what do we want to want? And so with those ideas of uniqueness, I synthesized the project's themes into 3 articles that I wrote for Orbiter magazine. And I know some of these ideas will probably be controversial because I wrote them to argue against some of the common philosophical assumptions of transhumanism. And each of them is a thesis, but here's the sort of Cliff Notes 3-slide overview of the main arguments that I put forward. The first one, in Robots to the Rescue, I argue that social robots will never fulfill our deepest relational needs. And the reason is because meaning and mortality go together. Authentically human relationships are not replaceable by AI, which are essentially immortal and replaceable. And I have 2 young children of my own, and when I think to their future 20 years from now, what it means to be successful or to function in society is really anyone's guess. But the one thing that I really do focus on is their capacity to love and to be loved. And there are important depths and subtleties to genuine human relationships that make that dynamic possible. In Virtual Flourishing, I argue that we flourish as socially interdependent creatures, biologically embodied in the physical world. And there's a lot of things that VR can do, a lot of great uses, but the ultimate expressions of human love require real-world physical stakes and the opportunity for genuine self-sacrifice to put others above oneself. Virtual worlds that lack these stakes will not completely fulfill our flourishing. And finally, in Consciousness in the Cloud, I argue that uploading our brains will not give us the immortality we want. It will not let us live forever. Design for human flourishing has to respect the irreducible reality of the embodied human consciousness. Again, we are a psycho-spiritual physical unity, and our singular identity does not replicate to other substrates besides the one that we came with. So if you check those out, there's a lot more behind them. And this quote has come up several times in the conference already, but it bears repeating. With those conceptions of human nature in hand, we better understand the modern predicament, which is basically that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So with that responsibility, we have to figure out how do we bring these together to create a more functioning, flourishing society. And I think the important frame for thinking of that in the context of what I just shared, of the sort of roots of our nature, of who we are as a species, is evolutionary mismatch theory. And this is where we're going to look at how our nature is getting hijacked in the modern environment and what we can do about it. So mismatch theory is a simple but a very powerful idea. This is a frame that I hope everybody can look at the world with, society, your daily lives, the products and problems that you're trying to solve. And it goes like this. Basically, cultural evolution is much faster than our genetic or biological evolution. And we've created modern environments to which our evolved traits are poorly adapted. And wherever we have this mismatch between our genes and our environment, behavior design or the development of some interventions are essential to close that gap. That's why design is imperative for flourishing in the modern context, because the context itself, the cat is out of the bag, there's really not much we're gonna do about it, but we working together can work to close the gap. So how does mismatch show up? It shows up in a lot of different ways. For example, incidence of myopia or nearsightedness, it's about 3% in hunter-gatherer populations, and in our modern environment and how we develop indoors, it's about 40%. And we see it in the development of flat feet because of the footwear and cushioning that we use. We see it in the need for orthodontia and for cavities and diabetes due to the refined cereal grain diet that we've adopted by and large. And a lot of these examples come from a great book, The Story of the Human Body by Daniel Lieberman. And it goes beyond our body. It goes also into our relationship with our minds and our desires. Addiction is the result of super stimulating substances. And a couple projects on that front that I've helped with. One is a fantastic book called Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke that I recommend. I helped her with the workbook a little bit. And another recommendation is Screen Time Genie. We built this in the behavior design lab about 5 years ago, and this takes the world's largest library of screen time solutions and helps match you with the one that works well for you. So in the context of super stimulating substances, those are some of the things that help close that gap. Also things like postpartum depression due to a lack of alloparental support and lack of parenting practices and short interbirth intervals are a mismatch condition. And finally, loneliness due to a lack of social integration, a lack of belonging. There's too many empty social calories in the form of social media, a stimulus that we have not yet fully adapted to, and it leads to a mismatch condition. And I want to look even closer at that. I think loneliness and our social health is a great example and is really central to flourishing, particularly our need to matter to others. So there's tons of slides I could show. This is just one illustrating the mismatch. We have age on the bottom and how much time people spend with different groups on the y-axis. And over time, you can see as people age, they spend more and more time alone. This would be an unprecedented situation in our hunter-gatherer history in which humans spent 95% of our evolution. And loneliness is not just sort of a fluke. It exists because of how deeply social we are as a species. Sociality is more than just another trait of humanity. I think it's one of, if not the, core defining feature of who we are. And we see that in the way that our sociality is expressed. We have more forms of social organization and ways of putting ourselves together just among hunter-gatherer groups than the entire order of primates combined. We're highly cooperative. Joseph Henrich calls it the secret of our success as a species is our cooperation. And we are uniquely capable of flexible behavioral repertoires of cooperation with strangers at scale. This is something that no other species can do. And our social brain is really the reason and it's a sort of bi-evolutionary pathway where our sociality drove our brain to be big enough to comprehend the social connection of the groups that we were a part of. And I'll skip the details for time, but the key idea here within the mismatch condition is to understand our EEA, the environment of our evolutionary adaptation. And you can think about this from any discipline, any dimension of our body and our mind and how we function. But let's think for a moment about the social evolutionary context. In our evolutionary history, we lived in relatively stable, consistent groups of 20, 30 people. You sort of only had to keep track of about 150 people total over most of the course of your life in this situation. And in that context, reputation and social information was super important. These were survival necessities. You needed to be valued by the group and known by the group. And in this context, realize the only way to get information was direct verbal communication. We've only had writing for about 5,000 years and mass literacy only for about the last 100. So that was the only way of getting information. And in this context, the interdependency, cooperation, fostered this essential element of mattering. Mattering is really key, and I want to go into that more. So this is the environment of our evolutionary adaptation, and let's think about the environment that we're in today. This quote by Philip Slater, "Individualism is rooted in the attempt to deny the reality of human interdependence. One of the major goals of technology in America is to free us from the necessity of relating to, submitting to, depending upon other people. Unfortunately, the more we have succeeded in doing this, the more we have felt disconnected, bored, and lonely." So this is pretty prescient, right? You know, any guess? Try to think when this was said. Could have been 2010, 2020. This was said in 1978, actually. So people have recognized this for a long time, and so these cautionary tales are still with us. So in our modern context, think of all the interdependence, the interreliance on other people that we have eliminated in our work, in our schooling and education, in how we entertain ourselves, even how we shop or exercise. All of those things used to involve relationships with other people, interdependence, and now all of those things are more or less been individualized and turned into a screen-based experience. So overall, I think we actually need the opportunity to rely on others, and even more to have them rely on us in order to matter. Interdependence is actually our superpower, and it's key to meaning, to mattering, and our flourishing. And it ties right back to how humans find meaning through self-sacrifice, and to the capacity to love and be loved. So technology has replaced that opportunity and that feeling, and I think it's a core reason why we suffer, and we have to bring connection back to our daily lives if we're going to reverse these trends. So in broad context, to close the mismatch gap, the easy way is just to live in accordance with our nature, wherever possible. However, that's not always possible, it's not always easy. So if we are to flourish in a mismatched world, we either need to transcend our nature or adapt our environment. And that second one, adapting our environment, is where we get the design imperative. As individuals in this room, as people working and building in this space, we have to engage in the deliberate behavior design to align our behavior and our environment to our nature. And that is how we promote human flourishing through what we build. And finally, I'll close with a relatively short section about how to do this more practically, how to bring measurement and conceptions and frameworks of human flourishing to the process of your own life and to the things that you're building and designing in the world. So I'll talk about measurement, which is something I've been very interested in for a long time. And in order to measure, in order to know what we're shooting for, it's very important to have these conversations. What does it mean to flourish? How might we measure that? There's not going to be a perfect measure that is appropriate to all contexts and circumstances and people, but there are some important starting places, and having the conversation, I think, is important. So I've got documents with like 500 pages of measures of human social connection and human well-being. So I'm only going to show you a couple of them. One of them is my master's thesis at Stanford with Well for Life. And their approach to measuring flourishing was to develop a lengthy questionnaire, about 200 questions. And the well flower here goes well beyond basic physical and mental health. We have dimensions of purpose, meaning, resilience, spirituality, authenticity, and a sense of self that's healthy and positive. And we can measure all of these with caveats, but we can measure them. Or if you want the short version, this is the 12-item Harvard Flourishing Index. And this one focuses on happiness and life satisfaction, mental and physical health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, and of course, close social relationships. So these are the starting points, I think, that you can think about. How do we do measurement in the context of the work that we do? This is an entire other talk, and it's a handout that I gave to you, and that's the summary of it. But basically, it's a one-pager on how to apply science in the process of product development for human flourishing. And to all of you, my plea and challenge is to put yourself on this roadmap with what you're building and elevate your evaluation game from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. With rigorous evaluation, we have just so much more confidence and power in what we are accomplishing, having the impact we think that we're having, and generating, appropriate attention and reputation for the products and things that we make. This is the back of the handout, has some of the caveats, etc. And finally, I want to close with our organization, Compassion 2.0, and I'm very happy to be here, and thanks to them for bringing me here. And to keep up with more of this evolving work on ontologies and conceptions and interventions for flourishing, check out our work at compassion2.com and the community of practice that we have there. So to recap, basically, I want you to remember humans have a nature. It is mismatched to the modern world in many instances, and we have opportunities to navigate that in our collective work. The conversations that we're having here this week are about the future of humanity and whether we flourish or further fragment. And I would leave you with just 2 closing ideas, which is that you matter by helping other people matter. And above all else, the most important thing to nourish in your work is the capacity of humanity to love and to be loved. So thank you very much. There's more there, slides, etc.